Hey guys, Youngblood with you, and today I wanted to do a should you buy video on the Anvil Legionnaire. Now this ship is currently in a concierge only concept sale, and I would think that we'll either see this go for sale to the wider masses either tomorrow or today, being Friday, or they will wait until Anvil Day at the Fleet Week to release this to the larger public with a little more information, including a full brochure and a sales page. Regardless, sometimes I feel comfortable doing a should you buy video early when there's a clear intention behind what a vehicle is meant to do, or if they give us enough information to be able to make an informed decision on. And I think we have that for this ship. The Legionnaire is another boarding ship, which I believe makes the fifth of these in the game, which is a little bit strange considering we don't really have that much gameplay yet to support that. So this was either made with Squadron 42 in mind, or it just fit into some other roadmap that CIG has at the current moment. There are some differences to the different dropships that let them stand apart a bit. You have the Prowler, which is a boarding ship that should manage stealthy drops more effectively. You have the Hoplite, which is a Vanguard variant, which should be able to fight its way into more drop areas more effectively than a true ship-to-ship boarding action. And serves as a multi-purpose ship a little bit better because it does bounty hunting really well. You have a Valkyrie, which can bring vehicles along for ground-based drops easier than it could do boarding actions. And then you have the Cuddy Steel, which is kind of acting like a small version of the Valkyrie. And then you could almost argue that you have something like the A2 that is in a completely different class. If you look at the two that are really more focused on boarding actions, I think that's going to be a smaller group of the Legionnaire and the Prowler, but even then the Prowler doesn't have specific utilities to allow for breaching, so you would then need to use the stealth to sneak up and use the hover pads that it has to be able to cling close to the ship, and then you exit and breach in EVA. The Legionnaire is the first that really appears to have the ability or this special utility for this purpose. By having a docking collar that extends, it locks on and then can use a hacking seat on the bridge to try and force the power grid to open the door. And even if that fails, you have weaponry and lockers, assuming you put it on board, in the crewed area of the ship where you can pull out breaching charges to force that thing open via explosions. Once that part of the job is done, you have the Marines that can then storm the enemy ship and get that job done. The Legionnaire is on sale for a warbond price of $100 and a standalone price of $120, which is way cheaper than I would have expected. The pricing for the other drop ships or boarding ships is $235 for the Cutlass Steel and the Hoplite. You have $375 for the Valkyrie and $440 for the Prowler. So you're looking at about a half to a quarter of the price of those other options. I think some of that is a function of the size of the vehicle, which is roughly freelancer sized with different proportions. It's 32 meters long, 23 meters wide, and 10 meters tall. So it's a smaller ship than some of the other options. It also has no pilot-controlled weapons, and carrying 8 Marines and 2 crew, it's carrying less passengers than all of the other options do as well. It isn't entirely defenseless. It has 2 turrets with 2 size 2 weapons on each. I will say that I do not love the placement of these because they are both on the top side of the ship down the center line. So if you are locked in with another ship during a boarding action, you have no weaponry or ability to protect your belly. And in a space battle, that is a big risk. You should be somewhat resilient because you do have 3 size 1 shields, which was previously only what the Sabre used to have, even though that was removed. You have heavy armor, being an Anvil ship, which is great, meaning that this thing can take a little bit of a beating, but you're not going to last forever. So if I'm being honest, I don't really know why the price is so low. It's really comparable to a ship like the M50. And you could argue, why is an M50 the same price as a Cutlass? But regardless, you can look at an M50 and a Legionnaire and say, it's a little bit weird. So maybe they want it to be more prevalent in the verse. But the pricing overall seems very reasonable, especially in comparison to the other options. The way this ship is meant to work is that the pilot flies in and uses the docking collar. And this docking collar is a little bit unique because it has 2 different options. It can either work on station-sized docking ports, which are significantly larger, or it could be used on a ship-sized docking port. opening up the incursion options that you have available to you and makes a docking connection. From there, the secondary seat in the cockpit will engage with the hacking station to attempt to breach through the security grid of the ship or the station, which I assume will eventually be a skills-based task. If they're successful, the doors are going to open, the FPS soldiers are going to storm in. If it's unsuccessful, one of the soldiers should grab the breaching pods from a locker, and this would take on a more standard boarding option, like would be done from a ship that doesn't have a hacking ability, and blow your way in. Speaking of that, the charges can be stored in the weapon lockers, which are accessible near the drop seats where your soldiers will be sitting, and also where they would be grabbing their long arms to be able to get ready for the fight. There is a question that would need to be seen, but how effective the hacking on the Legionnaire would be compared to something like a Herald or maybe a Sentinel. On one hand, the Legionnaire is specifically meant for unlocking doors and has a physical connection to the ship, so is it more capable of getting the job done? We'll see. On the other hand, the Herald is a more purpose-built data and hacking ship, so would it just have the advantage in general? We'll just kind of need to see how it pans out over time. Overall, the design of the ship is pretty sharp. It looks like a cross between a Terrapin and a Valkyrie, and it is very much Anvil and follows the design language that I appreciate there. There appears to be pivoting thrusters that allow for hover mode and easier landing and takeoff from planets, and when looking at the pictures combined with the stat sheets, it looks like there are 8 smaller thrusters that can do VTOL with 2 on each of the 4 arms. The other components on this ship are a size 1 radar and computer, which is a little surprising on the computer, considering it may be what's powering the hacking options on the ship. You have 2 size 1 power plants and coolers, 2 size 1 fuel intakes and tanks, and a single size 1 quantum drive, jump drive, and fuel tank. Overall, the components are about as what you would expect, with triple shields being the pleasant surprise and delight of the group. Additionally, you have no missiles or no cargo ability, which in my mind means that if you're wanting to stay out for extended stays in space, I would opt for energy weapons on the turrets as opposed to turret guns that would need to be rearmed at some point since you have no storage to be able to accomplish that. Especially if those guns are your only options for keeping your people safe inside the action from threats on the outside. But regardless, this ship isn't going to be a fighting force as it is very specifically built for getting your troops inside to the intended destination. The size of the ship seems to be a little big to be carrier-based, but I assume that depends on the size of the carrier, obviously. But a single size 1 quantum drive and fuel tank doesn't scream long distance to me, so the deployment and transportation and range of this ship may be important to consider for how valuable this would actually be in larger systems, and the associated reliance on a ship like a Javelin or an Idris, and if it even fits in an Idris or a Kraken or a Liberator. So, looking at the ship, should you buy the Legionnaire? It's tempting at the price point for a lot of people, because compared to other ships, it isn't a huge investment with the low price point. It could easily be CCU'd into something different if it just doesn't pan out to your liking. I would also say that if you are interested in the boarding gameplay, then this could be a logical lower price option to get into that. I would say that there is one very important call out here. There is no reliance on having a boarding ship, quote unquote, to be able to do the boarding. I think that the Legionnaire has a valuable asset in the docking collar that the other ships appear to be lacking, and if you've done EVA boarding of another ship, you know that most of the time that isn't a real graceful transition into the physics grid of the receiving ship. So being able to walk through a connection that bridges those grids to make for a more competent entry could be incredibly important. But back to the point. The information here specifically calls out that carrying charges to open up doors is part of what you should be doing in this ship. We now know that you can shoot doors open and ramps can fail. And with all of that in mind, there isn't anything stopping you from carrying these breaching charges on a Freelancer or a Cutlass and being able to board a ship. So with that in mind, you have advantages to using a ship like this, but there's no reliance on it either. Overall, I would say that I don't see a point in having more than one drop or boarding ship in your personal fleet. So unless you're looking for your first or really want something smaller and cheaper that can focus on the boarding action that takes advantage of maybe a more passive way of entering through hacking, then I think this ship is probably a pass for you. However, if you do want that boarding ship and you don't want that large investment into the other options on this list, then I would say that the price makes this a compelling option that's worth your consideration. There's also a consideration here for those that are doing piracy. And while you're not likely going to be using this to bring cargo back onto your ship because you have no cargo space, it would be a great supporting ship for piracy boarding actions. And something else considering would be that, if you're forcing your way onto a ship, so if you don't destroy and instead you disable that enemy target, you could just have one of your crew just fly off with that enemy ship and claim it as your own. And then not only have you captured cargo, but now you've claimed a ship, and that doubles your profit or significantly beyond that. So to summarize, the answer is yes to should you buy, with the caveat that you need to have the right mindset on what this will do because it is very singularly focused in its task. Once we get more information on this ship, or if it's a flyable option that comes out during Fleet Week, I'll make sure I'm covering that in a lot more detail, but for now, that's the recommendation video. Hopefully you found that helpful. If you did, I'd ask that you consider supporting the channel through Patreon or YouTube memberships. And regardless of that decision, I hope you guys got something good out of this. So I appreciate you watching. Stay tuned for a lot more coming soon. Have yourselves a wonderful day and take care.